When I was in high school, there was a kid in my algebra or pre-algebra class, something along those lines. It was a math class of some sort that um, he said, "I'll give you these two." They were tapes, cassette tapes at this point in time of a group called Public Enemy. And he said, if you do my homework, I'll give you these tapes. First of all, I'm terrible at math. So, whatever. I don't care. But, and I don't know what made me do it because I hate math. Why would I want to do double the work? But I wanted that music. I mean, growing up, I grew up in a small town, so finding good hip hop at that time, I listened to what I could that was available, and I enjoyed it. But there's just something about those two albums, which were, I think it was like one after another. It was the first one was "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back," and then "Fear of a Black Planet." Those were the two Public Enemy albums that he was going to give me to do probably the shoddiest homework job I could do. I didn't understand it as much. But anyway, that's beside the point. But what I learned, because one of the things that they did, Public Enemy did, was they printed their lyrics in the liner notes. And I would sit there and read those along with the lyrics, and listen to the names that are being talked about, and situations that are being talked about, and say to myself, well, who in the world are these people they're talking about? So, I would look for it. And then, I think it was the next year, the following year, I was able to get a job at the public library. And from there, there was a series of books that I found in the library that, and I can't remember the name of the series. I wish I could, but they weren't long books, or yeah, they weren't very long. They were biographies of people. But this series of books were biographies of black folks in our history, and they were, like I said, probably like 100 pages. They had pictures, like they're, but they gave an in-depth history of that person, and that person, you never heard about them in history classes. And what's interesting to me is that going through those liner notes and these Public Enemy albums, those names that they'd bring up, there was books on them. And so what I did, saying I was working in the library, I started reading those books and understanding who those folks were, because I wasn't being taught who they were. And, and they're just magnificent stories about people that are part of our history, but we don't hear about them at all. There's no monuments or statues. Well, maybe for Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, but not for some of the folks that, not like Nat Turner or Gabriel Prosser or anybody like that, or Benjamin Banneker or Matthew Henson. So people like that you don't know about, that have a vast history. And what was interesting to me, because when I started So after that moment, when I started researching those folks, I would change my what I would write about when it came to writing papers for like history or English or anything like that. I would choose like um, a historical figure that nobody would know about or was that information's available, but I would try to research somebody who didn't look like me. And that's what I would do papers on, and I would just, you know, and I would carry that into college for the simple fact that it's like this gives me an opportunity to write and learn about somebody new that's made an impact that I never got a chance to, that I wouldn't have learned anywhere else. Um, and so, speaking of college, and that's how I carried it on to college, and then I learned from teachers how ineffective and also how whitewashed our history was being taught. The men in power, the men, um, that just they weren't all that great of human beings. And so it was good to hear that and to hear what the history of our nation really is. I mean, like I've mentioned before in a previous video, I did take a Civil War and Reconstruction class that really broke down the whole structure and the legislation when it came to the Reconstruction era and the amendments and legislation that followed with post-slavery, also leading up there. I also took a Women in History course. I took a Native American history course and several African American history courses that really tried to open my eyes and try to learn. And it's not easy. I mean, when you have situations such as today, or like this past weekend, I watched Hamilton and got into some great discussions around that because for the simple fact that you have this play about one of our forefathers, but and it's a cast by an entire cast of, well, almost entire cast of people of color. And everybody knows that during that time, people of color were more or less considered property than actual people. But with that, there's just talk back and forth with how that went and how that played out and what it really means, and is actually more or less an immigrant story if you go back. I'm not going to dive into the Hamilton aspect of this, but all in all, what I'm saying is that one of the things that I did actively was try to learn and try to understand our entire history and what's going on. I'm a white kid from a mostly white town. Didn't really grow up with a whole lot of friends who are people of color. And so I didn't have that perspective to draw on, And so, but having the impetus and also the ability to use my privilege to try to figure out what's going on and what's happening with our history, why it's not being told correctly, but finding the right things to. I mean, who would have thought that my journey into true history, because I've always had a thing for American history. I've always liked American history, but to find the underlying truths came from a rap album. Nobody would have thought that. And that's the thing is, and that's where I feel like Public Enemy gets a bad, no pun intended, but bad rap. But they taught me a lot. They showed me that there's people who bring a strength and a power and a situation from where they're at, and they're forgotten about. And they're part of the whole fabric, maybe even more of an American fabric than, you know, than what we're used to. So that was, and that was like my journey there with that, and it opened my eyes because, but not only that, but I just want it to be said and want it to be told that these are books you can find. These are situations you can find as white people, as black people, as anybody. They're there. But we gotta open our eyes and be open to the fact that these narratives are there and they exist. Unfortunately, they get shoved to the side or hidden or all that. And I'm not saying that all the people that I read about that maybe people of color were perfect. No, they're human. They're just, but we have to take a look at the whole picture and where that's at. And so I know this will probably be a first part of a 2-part thing. I don't want to go too long, but just let you know that there's ways to find out the truths in history, but we just have to listen to what those truths are. So the more we ignore it, the more we deny ourselves the right story. And it doesn't have to be left unsaid. See you next time.